Test, test.
Good evening. Welcome to the March 1st budget work session. You good? Good. For the Lynbrook School District. If we could all please rise. Mr. Pileski will lead us in the salute to the flag. Roll call, everyone's present. I'll turn it over to Dr. Burek for budget presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to the 2023-2024 school year budget presentation for the Lynbrook Union Free School District. I may have a smile on my face. This is my last budget work session for the Lynbrook School District. Before I turn it over to Dr. Lynch, the past couple of years have been quite interesting between COVID and the aid packages. The last 2 years, Lynbrook has realized quite a hefty increase in state aid, but we're aware that these have been gifts to us and that there is an end in sight, a near end in sight to that. So as always, Lynbrook, we are financially prudent and we don't budget year to year. We always have a long-range plan in mind, and when we make decisions based on what is going to be the impact down the road for the taxpayer. So with that in mind, I do want to thank for one last time the entire administrative team for putting together an outstanding budget proposals for your buildings, for your departments, where you have the kids first and foremost in your mind, and you just want great opportunities for the kids, and you want to provide them the best. So you live the mantra of making our taxpayers' dollar work for them as best you can. So I thank you one last time for your diligence and your teamwork in that. And then I also state one last time, Dr. Lynch, for putting it all together, and thank you for putting a comprehensive budget that has a great many things, a lot of positive things in this budget that you're going to hear tonight, all good for kids. So thank you, and I will turn it over to you for the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Dr. Burek. I always like to start this meeting by telling people why we're here and why this is a different meeting from all the others of the year. So even physically, you'll see we're not in our normal spot. The board is facing each other. So all you people out there, technically all you're doing right now is eavesdropping. This is the board's work session to publicly deliberate a budget that they've had in their possession for about the last 2 weeks. You'll see I have a large binder in front of me. They've had that binder for the last 2 weeks. They've been going through it, and tonight's the night that we publicly deliberate it. So that's how we got here. We started back in the fall, as the people out there know. So our principals, our directors, all the budget managers are here, and they put together their requests. It came up through central administration. We went through a staffing process, and tonight we present it in work session form. If there are no major adjustments, the board is free to do whatever they want tonight. They can ask for additions, subtractions, but if everything is on board, then they will be adopting it next week at the March 8th meeting. If not, and more major revisions need to be done, we can always push that to April. So just to set up that context. Not to be overly dramatic, but I was realizing today as I was preparing for this budget presentation, this is the single most important budget that I have prepared in 10 years. There is so much in this budget and so many mistakes that could be made at this juncture with the budget that it is kind of scary. So we have seen historic aid packages, both coming down from Washington, $4.1 million in COVID money. We have seen 2 years of historic foundation aid increase. All of that is about to end. So as Dr. Burak mentioned, this board has done a 3-year plan to make sure that that financial cliff in 2025 does not happen. So much of what you're going to see tonight is the result of the year that we're in. We started planning for the fiscal cliff. We're continuing planning for that with what I'm going to present tonight. And then next year, it's someone else's problem to figure out how we get over that cliff. So that's kind of where we're going to go tonight. So let's start with what's in this budget and what are our programmatic priorities. As Dr. Burak said, there are some budgets where I've sat here and it's like, yeah, it's a budget. We're continuing stuff. This year, we're packing a lot in. So the programmatic priorities, we're adding contracted social work and mental health supports. This is going to be a theme that you're going to hear over and over tonight. I think the great harm of the COVID money, that $4.1 million, is the government gave it and take it away as if COVID's over and the kids are all better right now. And I think everyone in this room knows that's not the case. So we're actually going to be continuing that social work and mental health support. The wonderful OWL Success Academy, where we saw our first successful graduate just last month, and I know everyone in this audience was in tears to watch that, was done on grant money, and it's now successfully integrated into the budget. We did Sounds Right and Itchy's Alphabet. Those were responses to learning loss through the COVID time, and we started a brand new Science of Reading program that is now fully integrated into the budget. The high school is going to see some real fun stuff happening. We're going to let Mr. Bernhardt go crazy, and we're going to let him fly drones around the second floor. Mr. Sarosi, why that's a good idea, I'm not quite sure, but it's really cool. So we're going to start a drone course where the kids can actually come out certified with an FAA license in flying drones. AP pre-calculus is coming in, business law, and then a woodworking course at Lynbrook High School, which is just all wonderful stuff. Another important priority, 5th grade health. So we used to do the great puberty night, and everyone would get together and there would be a talk with the parents about the changes that happen around 5th grade. I think we've realized, and I know Dr. Balekis and Mr. Martellotti have had great conversations with the elementary principals, to say that's not enough. We need actually a comprehensive 5th grade health curriculum. So we're going to be adding to the health and phys ed staff, not for the sake of phys ed, but for the sake of health at the elementary schools. We are increasing funding for assemblies and field trip transportation. As you know, we have been really having some great conversations in this room about the future of the lunch program. And I would be remiss if I didn't say the tremendous admiration I have for our PTAs, who have had really thoughtful conversations with me about what the impact of a lunch program would have on their ability to fundraise. There is no greater partner than the parent-teacher organizations. They are not to be underestimated for the work that they do for this community. There are things that the district can do, and that's provide education, and there are things that the district can't do, and that's what PTA has done. So they were very firm in saying, you know what, we understand, we may want to bring in a elementary lunch program, but we're not going to be able to fundraise in the same way. So the goal of this budget is to fund elementary assemblies and fund elementary field trip transportation so that they can continue the good work they're already doing. You know, we all know up here things that PTA can never say at the microphone. The families that they subsidize, the trips for all that they are secretly taking care of and never really asking for the credit for it. They have been done that. They have been committed to that. They are to be applauded for that. And I think tonight this board is going to enter a more serious partnership with them for that. And then we're going to be introducing an elementary lunch program. We'll see where that comes. So here's the real story. It all comes in staffing. So there are 4 full-time employees who already exist on our staff and have been on our staff for 2 years. They have been funded by the federal government, and if we want to keep them, we have to figure out a way to get them into the budget. We started them half this year, then the full other half comes in next year. So the 1.0 guidance counselor at the high school remains fully integrated into the budget. The 1.0 special education teacher at Marion Street, now fully integrated into the budget. The second half of the full-time social worker that we started last year, now fully integrated into the budget. Same thing with the psychologist. Same thing with the reading teacher. Same thing with the speech teacher. All of that was in response to COVID. All of that needs to continue. This budget does it. We now continue the use of 1.0 FTE that we hired this year that were not in this year's budget. That was an expansion of special education at Marion Street. That person needs to remain in the budget. And then we also are expanding our orchestra program at the elementary schools, and we increased FTE there, and that will continue next year in the budget. Continued staffing. Again, remember, this is normally on one slide, and I hit it and I'm done. This is really significant stuff that's happening here. We're adding 2.4 FTE professional staff. That's 1.0 reading that will probably be housed at South Middle School. 0.2 FTE family and consumer science. So we have a wonderful, wonderful career development program at North, and we have seen how good our career development program has interacted here at the high school with the family consumer science department. So this adds that same ability at North so that CDP can have a full family consumer science experience up at North. There's the health teacher is being added there as a 0.2. And then also very revolutionary, and this also came from the PTA room, I might add, is that we know that we have had horrible times maintaining occupational therapists through the use of contracted providers. So this budget proposes hiring for the first time in 30 years, Dr. Burak, an occupational therapist on staff that may continue something to come through for the next few years. We're going to be introducing 9.0 paraprofessionals. That is 2 full-time teacher assistants and 7 teacher aides. Some of them are already here post-budget. You know, that warms my heart, but we need to totally get them integrated. And then finally, the other big thing that this budget does, this year we started a full homegrown security force using retired law enforcement. It amounts to 12.0 FTE of security guards. This budget fully puts them into the budget so that we sustain that. So when you look at those 2 slides and see what we're doing with this budget, it's about this year and it's about the years to come. All right, getting down into the budgets themselves. So the superintendent and the Board of Education, they were very good boys and girls. They're coming in completely flat, 0% variance on both of those. That's a good thing. We can't say that about curriculum and instruction, Dr. Belekas, now can we? So curriculum and instruction sees a 27.64% increase. What are some of the drivers regarding that? Well, we see the management fee for our security service. We use covert security. We have a great director of security, Joe Azaretto, who's with us, who's not actually a district employee, but is funded through a BOCES program. And we don't just get Mr. Azaretto, but we also get training and threat analysis from covert security. We see a $203,000 increase in one of our BOCES regional certification codes. That's where the assembly funding is going to hit. We did an analysis of elementary assemblies over the last year. We skipped the COVID years and we went back to the 2 years before that. And we were spending approximately $28,000 a year in BOCES assemblies alone. Our traditional way of handling that is that the district puts $950 towards that, and then the rest of them are assumed by the PTA. This budget is going to fully fund those assemblies at the cost of $30,000 to provide all elementary assemblies on the district. So that was our commitment to make sure that PTA didn't have to do that type of fundraising so that their fundraising can go into other directions. The Owl Success Academy hits that code. And then finally, Mrs. Schaefer did a wonderful presentation last year about a 2-year plan to get really nice instruments from BOCES and high-scale instruments that are right now in our presence. And we're going to do the second contract on that next year. And then the good news, a $41,000 decrease in charter schools because 2 students have now come back home. Personnel, transportation, and student support services. So this is Dr. Berman's department. It sees an increase of $293,000. That's a 13.10% increase. Some of the key drivers there are $117,000 due to the increase in non-public school transportation because we've added 6 new non-public schools to the budget. We also see a $129,000 increase in in-district transportation, mostly due to CPI, which is driving the cost of the busing, and also increased need for displaced student transportation. Now, we've had some very good discussions. The board had authorized Dr. Berman and myself to meet with representatives of the non-public school community about thinking about ways that late busing could be included into this budget. You will note on this slide that this amount that is up there that is being presented does not include late busing. However, I do want to present the board a couple of options. So you'll see a number up there that is $1.2 million to include all schools. That's the outside limit. We know that's not a real number at that point. It's not going to cost us $1.2 million because when we look down at the numbers, and Dr. Berman did a lot of good work where she surveyed our non-public schools to find out who would actually use a late bus. So we really came down to providing late busing for all non-public schools that have a need for it would be about $850,000 to add to this budget. So that would be one option. In also meeting with the representatives of the non-public school community, we saw that there were ways that policy could change. And if the board enacts policy to limit late busing to only schools with certain numbers of kids, well, then that cost can come down. So another option would be if you picked a number at the policy committee. This is just a budget discussion tonight. This is not the policy discussion. You'd have to do more work on the other side. But for a budget number, if we picked a number of 5 or more kids that go to the non-public school, that number would then come down to 9 schools, and that would be at the cost of about $225,000. If the board made other policy decisions and they decided that it would be only non-public schools that had 10 or more students, that gets down then basically to 2 schools, and that could be done as cheaply as $50,000. So those are kind of the places to go. We can keep the number up there as is, or we could do any variation of that. Tonight's not a policy discussion, it's a budget discussion, so we'd need some guidance on that.
So, just to start off a discussion, one of the topics you raised as ways to possibly bring down the $850,000 figure is cutoffs, numerical cutoffs. And I just raised for discussion purposes the issue of equity, how that really applies to all kids in the community. If you're doing that, aren't you kind of giving an advantage to certain kids who go to certain schools, while other kids who would fall below that threshold are not getting the same benefit? And that's just a question, to others on the board, how they feel on that topic.
I would agree with Mr. Lunar. I feel that as a board, we have an obligation to serve the entire community, those who attend public schools, those who attend non-public schools, and to put a numerical cutoff, whether intentionally or not, it would create sort of arbitrariness to who is entitled to late busing, and I don't feel that we can intentionally set up a system that could turn out to be arbitrary. So I think for me, if we feel we can afford the full $850, that's what we would have to do. I don't think it would be appropriate of us as a board to make any other threshold other than that. I think it has to be all or none in order to not intentionally create a system that's arbitrary.
So I'll be looking for a consensus of the board. This does not require formal board action. We're very clear on that the board does not need to vote on this issue. It just needs to, do I have direction basically to add in or not add anything into the budget at this time?
I would say not to add the late busing. I don't think that we can take that $850,000 hit. That's me.
So clearly, there is no consensus to put it into the budget.
I'm being
So keep
directed to
it-
put,
That's what I'm saying. Right, so there's one board member who spoke up. Is there any consensus from any board members to add the 800? Well, there's two options. There's multiple options on the table, actually. We can go with other things other than that. But I'm not seeing now, nor have I seen in the past, a movement by the board in any way to add any aspect of this. So does anybody on the board want to speak for advocating adding the busing? There's an articulate argument made, Mr. Murray, about the fact that we would be, in essence, discriminating against particular groups, whether intentional or not, by dropping that number down to what became a more cost-efficient way of doing it. So it seemed like, from previous conversations, the 850,000 would be the only fair way to do it. Is there a consensus or an intention of any of the board members to move forward with that 850,000, or anyone making an indication of doing some other option of that? Okay, I'm going to go by the silence of the board that you continue to proceed without adding that into the budget.
thank you, Mr. President. All right, that moves us on to the Finance Operations and Information Systems Department, which sees a variance of $55,000. Most of that is driven by a $7,000 increase in our newsletter costs, just to rising printing costs. You'll see a $22,000, almost $23,000 increase in BOCES central processing due to integrating some technologies into that budget. And then an increase of about $30,000 in insurance due to some rising premiums. So just pretty standard costs there. Get to talk about debt and interfund transfers. So we're in our fourth year of 20-year debt service. It pretty much remains almost flat. It's on a schedule. We'll be paying this for the next, obviously, couple of years. So that's where it is at this point. Interfund transfers, everyone knows this is one of my geeky things that I really love to talk about. So one of them is continuing $5,000 to fund the food program. But also a thing to watch, we're actually decreasing the amount needed in interfund transfers because of the extended year program at Waverly Park. It's something to watch in the future because of the way the state sets the rates, so that number could start to rise again. We haven't really started to see where that's going to bottom out at, so we're just going to keep our eye on that one, but we're pretty comfortable with that number for next year. Taking a look at facilities, it sees a drop of about $5,000. You'll see a large decrease in contracted security. So when I present the budget tonight, I'm presenting the budget in what I call the Lynbrook way. I'm presenting it not according to state, but by who's managing the budget out there in the audience. So Mr. Seda normally would contract with a security company to do all our security. That disappears because we have our own security force. It doesn't mean the money's gone. It's going to come back into the salary slide, just so everyone understands that. We see we want to replace our transit van. The messenger van currently has 120,000 miles on it. And then $7,500 for new restroom sink faucets at Waverly Park. They actually have sinks in every classroom, so that would be replacing all of that hardware. And then, of course, utilities are always going up, $14,500 in electric and $62,000 in natural gas. You may be wondering about oil. We prepared for the worst-case scenario this year, and we're comfortable with that continuing to be the worst-case scenario for next year. Very important to talk about the capital projects in the budget. This will come in later when we talk about the tax cap. So these are the projects that would pass. When the budget passes, these projects also pass. So there's a $500,000 presentation here tonight for a cafeteria renovation and equipment project. So what that would be buying cafeteria equipment, hot and cold serving tables for all of the elementary schools and the kindergarten center. And in addition, Marion Street's already getting renovated through another project this summer. This also donates some money to West End because it would be very tight to put the serving trays in there that way. So Mr. Seda has an architect's drawing that can expand the West End cafeteria. Now, I don't want to say like we're adding another whole room, but it will be able to offset where the serving tables go. We also see where, we have our 200-year-old or almost 100-year-old buildings at Marion Street and West End. So we continue to do slowly but surely renovate classrooms there year by year. We continue that with this budget. The school budgets. So the school budgets, sorry, there we go. The school budgets go up 8.54%. So the elementary budgets will see a $15,000 increase in instructional supplies, and most of that is due to the ITCHES alphabet and the decodable text, both for TC and for the Sounds Right program. And then you see the other half of that commitment to the field trip money there. There's an increase in elementary transportation costs to cover the cost of the transportation so that the PTAs don't necessarily have to subsidize that. At the secondary school, we see a $6,200 increase in combined instructional supplies. So even though there's going to be a full woodworking course at the high school, that's also going to be articulated down at the middle schools. So both Mr. McNally and Mr. Fanning will also be doing something in addition to, what's Errol's last name? I want to call him. Good, Disman. Sorry, Errol. And then you'll see there's a $17,000 increase in activities and supervision codes at the secondary level. This is also a function of our children with special needs becoming more and more integrated in the life of our schools. So when children with special needs do extracurricular activities, they need some extra supports in order to have them fully integrated into that experience. So therefore, we, a great thing that's happening at the high school is the expansion of the Challenger program. So we've always had Challenger basketball. Now they're looking to expand it into other areas, and that's now fully the Owls Buddy Club. So that's some great stuff happening there. And then a $9,100 increase in transportation. That's mostly associated just really with the rise of transportation costs. Special education, again, this is not including salaries. This is just on the contracted side of the house. It's an increase of 3.87%. Very important to look at this. We are creating a brand new budget code. So we are going to be putting $150,000 in a new BOCES code so that we can secure psychiatric services, not psychological. It's going to be a psychological code, but it's to have a psychiatrist who's able to work with us on a regular basis, and we'll be able to get that. And then the good thing is it's a BOCES service, so it will also be aidable in the next year. We also see an increase of $525,000 in private tuition, but watch that carefully. You'll also see two decreases there, a decrease in public tuition and BOCES. Some of those placements are moving from public tuition and BOCES into private, and so I think we have 4 new students and 2 students who are changing placements. So that's all what's also happening there. So that's mostly happening on the tuition side. You may have some questions about related service. It pretty much is staying flat. We're just moving it amongst buildings to kind of normalize it. So Marion Street's going to get more because of the new section. Waverly Park gets a little more. But otherwise, it's still pretty much where it needs to be. Communications and technology, so that's a 10% increase there. So we see a $38,000 increase in district software, and there's a lot of things happening in that software code. So we're upgrading our filter. We're also looking at a mobile device management program so that, we do have enough iPads around, even though we're not standardized on them. We need a tool to help us manage those. An increase in $94,000 in BOCES network administration. We're going to be replacing 3 full sets of laptops this year. We're going to be doing first grade, 10th grade, and all faculty and staff are also, because they were actually pre-COVID. So that's another issue there. And I think we're investigating some new devices to bring in that might be a little bit quicker. So that's also some good news there. You'll see an increase in the computer repair code because now we have all these security systems that are starting to be implemented. There are going to be maintenance costs associated with that. And then an increase in $53,000 in the BOCES software code because Mr. McDermott is gradually moving library subscriptions to the BOCES code. We start to see aid on that, so it's kind of a way to produce revenue in addition to the expense. On athletics and health, this is a 6.73% increase, a variance of $100,000. So I have a little, you know me, Mr. Martellotti, I'm just such a jock. But here's my way. Why are you all laughing at me? But no, I was a theater guy, I will admit it. What I love about this code going up $100,000, you've never heard a business official say that before. More kids moving more often. That's what this code is about. So let's take a look at that $11,700 in the intramural code. Mr. Martellotti has worked with the teachers to get the weight room open every day, not just for weight kids, but for all sports, all kids who aren't on sports just coming in to learn to appreciate their bodies and to lift weights. So that's like a good thing for all kids. And then an increase in coaching salaries because the programs are expanding and we're expanding programs. So an addition of a varsity assistant football coach, a new program would be boys volleyball at the varsity and middle school level, a coach for girls gymnastics, which is a new program. The cheerleading program is growing in leaps and bounds, so we need an assistant coach in that program now. We had a pilot program called flag football. We now have a full program that needs a varsity and assistant varsity coach for flag football. That's a new program. And the wrestling program is growing and needs a varsity assistant coach. So more kids moving more often. Fine and performing arts. That sees a 4.71% increase. So that's kind of a misnomer because remember when I talked about Dr. Balekis' budget, there was some money hidden in there where we're funding some BOCES instruments. So that's also a fine and performing expense, but it's not booked in fine and performing arts. But what is booked here is a $7,000 increase in instrument rental because even though this BOCES program is awesome and wonderful and we're getting to own our instruments, the supply chain has been holding some of them up, so we still need some money for the worst case scenario to rent instruments that haven't arrived yet when the year starts. And then I guess clay just costs a lot more, Mrs. Schaefer, that's what I'm hearing. So a $1,500 increase in the art supplies code just because stuff is more expensive. Another important code, guidance and counseling. So this one is a 4-year-old department. It's a 4-year-old budget. For 4 years, I've been saying it's flat, it's flat, it's flat. It sees an increase of 71% this year. A further commitment on the district's part for the mental health supports. It integrates something that we've been paying for in the grant, $50,000 for Central Nassau guidance to continue. That is the presence right now of a social worker on call virtually once a day from 12 p.m. to 7 p.m. that is currently helping 25 families. That is now a further commitment that the district is going to do by fully integrating it into the budget and make it part of our life here. And then also continued support of the South Oaks Job Coaching Program. That's been a traditional $50,000 expense every year. We're going to use them in some different interesting ways with our new PAYS lab upstairs. But the budget to budget, it remains the same amount of money. Oh, I'm sorry. I misspoke. Doctor, what am I going to do without you handing me notes in the middle of a budget work session? I just don't know. So I must have said the words, it was once a day. That's incorrect. It is once a week that we have a social worker on Thursdays. Okay, so thank you. All right, special programs. This is all of our summer playground, summer school, adult education. We have to increase about $13,000 because we really are having a hard time keeping summer counselors, and we needed to raise the rate to attract people, and then contractual increases at summer school, and then other increases with adult education staff. As salaries and benefits goes, there goes the budget. So most of this budget is contained in salaries and benefits. So we see a 5% increase in salaries. But remember, that is not just adding salaries that are contractually. It's also adding all those people I talked about on the first slide. So that's what's really happening there. And then benefits, we have seen just crazy increases in health for the last couple of years. We've seen a 15% on top of a 12%. We're hoping that's not going to last much longer, but we're going to see a $1.1 million increase in benefits. There's also some impact on the pension costs, because the thing is, as soon as when you hire more people are going to be paid into the pension system. So even though TRS is going down, ERS is going up, and we do see an increase there overall, budget to budget. So here's the slide I know you've all been waiting for, the great expenditure summary that I'm now going to read line by line. Kidding. Just want to make sure we're all still awake, you know. This stuff isn't dry. This is fun. This is okay. There. So anyway, when you add all those things up that I just talked about, we will be proposing our first budget over $100 million this year. So it is a $101,839,388 million budget, an increase of $4.9 million, a 5% increase over last year. So that's one side of it. So that's the expenditure side. Those are all our asks. Where are we going to get the revenue? We now go to the other side of the ledger. So the first thing that we're going to do is to talk about local revenue and where we will be getting those funds from. So adult education and summer school, we pretty much will see that remain flat at about $123,000. Some bad news, but it's necessary to fund all those increases at summer playground. We're going to have to institute a $10 per child increase next year. So that revenue actually increases from the 150s into 165. Health at other districts is going to stay the same at about $170,000. Rentals are going to rental income. So we saw rentals on Ms. Schaefer's budget. That was it going out. We also take money coming in, and that will remain about the same. I know everyone wants to talk about pilots. This is everyone's favorite topic, and it's a big deal this year. Pilots, payments in lieu of taxes. So that number is, and the board has in front of them a sheet that details the fact that 4 pilots ran out in 2023. So that will have a huge impact later, but we were collecting pilots from 4 properties that we no longer will be collecting them from. So that number last year was $5 million, and now it's only $3.6 million. So your question could be, oh my God, we're losing all that revenue. It's going to come back in another slide in a little bit, so please keep your eye on that pilot. But yeah, so now as I look at it, 1, 2, 3, 4, we only have 5 pilots remaining in the district. Special education, other districts for services at Our Lady of Peace, that will remain about the same. Another good story is interest. So the interest is actually going up, as you're probably all aware of. So that has a huge impact on what we're able to gain from there as a revenue source. So we project that at $350,000. Our miscellaneous is going to remain about flat at $185,000. Use of reserves. So what we do to make sure we balance things out is we fill reserves and we use them, and that's in part of our strategy. So we propose $1.4 million in our use of reserves. We would like to request $1 million from the ERS reserve, $300,000 from the workers' compensation reserve, and $180,000 from the employee benefits reserve. After that use, the retirement reserve will have about $3.6 million in it still. Workers' compensation will have $1.3 million, and employee benefits will have $2.7 million. And so about $7.7 million will remain in those reserves, and it's used to offset some of these costs. So that's the use of reserve figure. The big story tonight is state aid. So you've all been reading in Newsday that we are seeing historic increases in aid. This district sees a 24% increase in state aid. So the big number is there in the foundation aid. That is almost $3 million increase over last year. I want to draw your attention to the next line, universal pre-K. All you mathematicians who, if you run that column, it's not going to equal the number at the bottom. You're going to be off by $842,400 because we don't get to use that in the general fund. We put that out to the F fund where we fund UPK. So we will now be able to fund 156 seats in UPK. So we truly become a UPK district. You know, that's where actually you're going to be awarding a new contract next week for some of that. Then the transportation and BOCES aids, those look like big numbers, but you have to be careful because we have to use it or lose it. So we only get that money if we spend it this year. And when you put all of that together, we see about $19.5 million in state aid. That may not match what you read in Newsday because I've adjusted it based on reality. So the foundation aid is exactly what you'll read in Newsday, but when you read some of those BOCES or transportation aids, I know where we're trending, so I've dialed them down a little bit. So that brings us to the tax cap. And this is going to be an important formula this year. So for those of you, and not to beat the dead horse, but the tax cap was instituted in 2011, and it's nominally known as the 2% tax cap, but really what it is 2% is part of a large formula. which starts with last year's levy. So that top line is last year's levy. We get to add any improvements that have been happening in the district, and there have been plenty, actually adds to the value of our properties, and our properties have gone up by that 1.0033 that's on the board there. Now, last year's pilot number. We add in last year's pilot numbers, which was 5.1 million, but let me just draw you down to the bottom line, which is this year's number. That's only the 3.6 number. There's a $1.5 million delta between those two. I want you to keep that number in your mind. Mr. Belmont, you're going to remember 1.5 million? You got it locked and loaded, 1.5 million. I'm going to ask you later, what's that number? 1.5 million. So you're going to see that delta there gets very important. We look at last year's exemptions. There's the 2% finally. The 1.02 is what we times that by. So our basic limit is $74,893,571, a 2.47% allowable tax cap. However, we get to add certain exemptions to that to increase the limit. What are some of those exclusions? There's our tax levy before exclusions, the one from the previous slide. We add our debt service because we get to exclude that. We get to add, remember the capital slides projects, where we're going to do remember the 100-year-old buildings? Remember we're going to do a couple of classrooms? We're going to do the cafeterias. Those numbers come in there. We get to add an exclusion from BOCES. But then we have to subtract building aid, which this year is $834,000. You need to watch that number because I'm about to file a bunch of reports, and it's going to be asking the state for aid on a $24 million extension to this building. So starting next year, that number is going to drastically go up, and you see the little minus? That's going to come out of the tax caps, just something to keep in mind for next year. So that means our allowable limit, what we are permitted by law, not with a supermajority, but just with a 50% vote, we can levy a $76,551,175 levy. That's a 4.74% allowable increase. Keep that in the back of your mind also. That's the limit. But that's not how it works. The actual way, for those of you that are also financial geeks, the way you actually figure out the calculation is by subtraction. So the state says, put up your budget. There's that 101 number that I talked about before. Subtract the state aid. There's the $19.4 million budget number that I talked about before. Subtract your local revenue. There's the $6.2 million that I talked about before. Subtract money that you're going to use from this year's budget into next year's budget. That's that $1.2 million figure up there. And whatever can't be paid for is your tax levy. So to fund this $101 million budget, we need $74,989,523, a $1.5 million below limit. So where we're allowed to go up to 4.67, we're only asking to go 2.6. Mr. Belmont, what was the number I wanted you to remember? 1.5. Bam! 1.5 million. It's a function of the pilots. So what's going to happen here, and I think this is, I'm joking about it, but it's really nothing to joke about. We are never going to see foundation aid like this again. We are never going to see a decrease in pilots like this again. We are going to be at the mercy of the levy. So that if we add programs to the level of 4.75%, will we be able to sustain those programs when the cliff comes, which is starting next year? So if we want to keep, and you see already what we are adding to this budget, we're preserving all these jobs, we're keeping all these mental health supports. Do we want them to go away? No, we want it to be sustainable. So this kind of matches what we can kind of expect from the levy going forward, hopefully, and some reasonable increases in state aid. So that's the question.
What percentage increase was our aid this year compared to last year?
24.
24% more.
And I think that's why we're being careful with that 800,000, because that would bring us, over that levy amount and not, be able to sustain that in the future. And,
What is the state, what is Albany contributing that high increase to?
That's a great question. So they are having multiple, I think, Mr. Murray, you said you went to that interesting workshop. So there are two things. They have an influx of federal money. They've had really good, they've had some good earnings with their investment portfolio, but it's, I used to like when this wasn't recorded because I could say something like this, but sometimes it's smoke and mirrors that they're attributing.
Oh, we
that
still haven't gotten all our COVID money, so there's smoke and mirrors there too. But why are we so sure that over the next 3 to 4 years, we're not going to see another?
Because we've been told.
That just, but
They've been
they
told.
us that.
But
But the
Tom
fact that-
DiNapoli said, you're not getting it.
Right, but the fact that we got it this year, 2, 3 years ago, they didn't tell us we were getting it now either.
Well, the problem there is they owed us that money for many years.
Right.
So they have been cheaping out on foundation aid for years. With the influx of federal money, they said, hey, we can balance the budget, we can pay these districts what we owe them. So really, that's money we should have had back when I was first business official in 2012.
Well, then that begs, the influx of federal money was based on what?
COVID dollars.
It is the COVID dollars we got.
I mean, I've been lobbying in Albany for years, and every year we're just asking for the foundation aid, and I'll be there next
Yep.
week, so you can give me some numbers to actually push, and that's one thing that I want to ask, you know.
So when you look at what,
With
you know,
these
so if,
specific
unless
numbers.
they do a true increase to foundation aid and not just back
Right.
fund, really all this does, and we're pretty much there at this point, we're pretty much made whole from what they owed us.
Right.
That's where we're at
But
now.
they need to do a true,
So it's hard to look people in the face and say, it's a 24% increase, but it's not really a 24% increase, but it's not really. It's back payment that's coming there. So the other warning I'm going to give here is I've talked to some of my counterparts in other districts around us. That 2.6 is actually going to be high compared to some of our neighbors because some of our neighbors are going out literally with a 0% increase in their tax levy, even though they're seeing budget-to-budget increases of 5, 6, and 7%. We're seeing a 5% increase in budget-to-budget. We're proposing basically to do 2.6 of it with tax levy money, do the rest with foundation aid, do a little more with reserves, and let's set up the future so that we can be viable. That's the plan that we're presenting tonight. And by the way, keep all those people, include the mental health supports, and do all the fun stuff he wants to do with Itchy's Alphabet. So that's the levy.
So while you're on that page, you mentioned the pilots. So the pilots that are ending, which is the 4 of those, the numbers, do we know what our numbers will be in 24 compared to what they were paying in the pilot, or we won't know until then?
So when they come on the tax roll, I do, it's not in front of me right now, so if I had just if I kept last year's data that was on this spreadsheet this morning, I would be able to answer that
Do
question.
you find it to be a significant way either way, or?
So all that's happening here is we're simply moving it from, so why is that $1.5 million on that slide? We're moving it out of the pilot
All right, you
thing,
explained that
and we're putting it
previously,
into the
right.
tax levy. That's all that's happening.
So the
here.
feather factor, which is knocked down, is still paying taxes, but it's based upon a much lower number because it's not in the right.
Correct.
So and when they propose, or I think they're proposing another apartment complex, whatever it is, that will most probably be another pilot.
Most probably.
But it'll still at least be more money than whatever we're getting out of it now. Would have to be more than what they're paying in the taxes now.
Well, it depends on the property. I don't want to answer that with a broad brush.
isn't it usually more, and that's why communities are usually so upset about the pilots?
Well, I'll
Because
tell you
they
what
pay.
normally happens. Okay, so I have it, when you read the history of pilots in this district, past performance does not talk anything about the future. I'm going to do all those disclaimers now. Generally, what happens when they establish the pilot, it will be pretty darn close to what they're paying already. And then what you'll see it amateurize. You'll see the first year, it starts to go down, and then midway through, it's pretty darn low, and the difference between what they would be paying and what the pilot is drastic. It helps them, it's a new business. I can see from that side too. They're trying to get rolling, give them some time to get up, and then the curve comes up again, and then they try to get them as close to what they're gonna be to pay out. That's generally how IDA structures them. They don't have to structure it that way, but that's just what I've seen with the ones that I know about.
So the properties that have just come off recently, the pilot, the revenue isn't disappearing. That revenue is just appearing in the form of tax dollars from
Correct.
those same properties.
Correct.
Right. It's
Which
not a loss
which
of
if
revenue.
you adopt this budget and this levy, you're choosing not to exercise that in this particular year.
Right.
But it will be there. It's gonna hit the tax rolls. That's what literally happens.
Right.
It goes back into the class 4 properties.
So since we're talking about the levy, you know, for the last however many years, the sort of conventional wisdom was go to the maximum because you can never get those dollars back. Like once you leave them on the table, they never come back. And we're choosing to not go to the max allowable levy with this budget. So could you just like briefly, like what is the upside to not going to the max and what are some of the potential consequences to not going to what's the maximum allowable levy?
So let me answer the second one first. So there is, and we've never exercised this formula here, so I will need to actually consult with some other people who have done so. There is the ability to carry over unused levy into another year. It's not the full amount, you'll never get the full amount, but it's a percentage of that. Based on this year's formula, we would have the right to carry over about 1.1 million into next year's levy if we needed that. So that is kind of like the safeguard. It's not gone forever, it's just somewhat reduced. So a business official once told, so what's the upside of not going to the allowable limit? A, sustainability, because if we started to add stuff that is above that and we can't reach that number again in coming years, it would mean accessing real people. So that's one. And then I think the other thing that can't be underestimated is the trust that the community has always had in this board. This board has asked this community to do hard things, and they've always responded. They pretty much say, they always respond, they always weigh in with their opinion. And I think when you do the calculations and say, no, we only need 74 million, so why would we ask for more? I think that is, you know, to say to people, that's what we need, please give us what we need. And, you know, we know the history of this community of what that will probably look like.
And I appreciate you being responsible in putting this together for us because it is tough. Like sometimes you're like, oh, let me get the most I can get, but that's not fair to everyone who lives here.
And that's 74 million not going to the highest allowable amount while adding programs and staff and, you know, what we need, which I think is important.
And I'd like to, you know, so I'll say that to the folks at home that are listening, is that's the word, you know, that a 2.6, it may be higher than some of our neighbors, but there's a lot in this budget. It's doing a lot for kids. It's helping a lot of people, and it's a sustainable, we hope it's a sustainable plan. That's the idea. So that's when I said, you know, now you think you'll all understand. When I was being overly dramatic at the beginning and I said, this is the most important budget I've prepared in 10 years, this is the most important budget I've prepared in 10 years. All right, so that was all Proposition 1. That's the budget. That's basically as it goes. We're going to have 3 other propositions on the ballot. The use of the technology reserve. So we are in the phase 2 of a wiring project. So last year we asked you for money to do wiring for our security systems. The voters gave it to us, and we've already implemented that. Ms. Couchet is well into that project. We're asking you for phase 2, and this would be the wiring. So most of this you will not see. It is going to happen in walls. It's going to happen replacing infrastructure. So we're proposing attacking our 2 90-year-old buildings, West End and Marion Street, with new wiring, and then next year we would follow up then, because really Waverly had just gotten some new wiring through the Smart Bond project, so it kind of catches them up, and then you'll see that come all the way through Waverly, the middle schools, and finally the high school. So it's a multi-year project there, but they ask for next year's program is $276,000. And then we have that One to World. We do some of it through the budget, and then we do some of it through proposition. We're asking for $87,500, and that technically does replace the grade 10 devices. Just when you put those together, it's an ask of $464,000. After we use that money, there'll still be $628,000 in that reserve, and we have authorization at the end of this year, if we can afford it, to put another $500 in. And then again, this has no impact on the tax levy at all. It's money that we have in the bank. Use of the facilities reserves. So these are some things that you're going to hear this theme again. So we have 2 100-year-old buildings that have 100-year-old beautiful doors. So Marion Street and West End have these beautiful big windows, and it looks like something right out of the Little Rascals, which is not the way that we necessarily want things to be in this hyper-security age. So we are going to be proposing replacing every door in those classrooms with security panes and take the wide windows and make them narrow windows and start to investigate ways that they can be responsive to lockdown. That's a sad thing to have to say today. That's, that's just, to say we're going to take out these beautiful old doors and put in new ones that have smaller panes that we can automatically lock down. And then you'll be seeing that continuing. That's just where we're starting. You'll be hitting with Waverly Park, and then we'll be going up through the other schools. That's also a multi-year project that would be going on. We don't necessarily have to replace the doors because they have much newer doors, but you'll see some stuff on the security side. The high school elevator, I think it's on its last legs, and we got 1 or 2 years left on it, so we need to replace it at the cost of $500,000. And the south bathroom and grounds project, so there is a bathroom in the back hallway by the technology room, kind of back there. If you've been there and you've seen it, you know why it needs to be replaced, I think was the opinion of the facilities committee. The bathroom's in pretty bad shape, so that needs to be changed. And then the grounds project, if you picture all that blacktop that's outside the custodial office, that's in really bad shape. We want to rip it up and replace that. We also want to refresh we've done a lot of work on the playgrounds in the other schools. We now need, I've been business official for 10 years. We're starting to redo stuff that we did in the beginning of my term. So we're going to start to refresh those tennis courts and those basketball courts and then seal coat the entire parking lot. So that's a thing. And then because we're marrying it to a bathroom project, we get to see aid on the whole project. So that is an ask of $1.7 million. When we do the balances after use, so technically how that will work, I have to disclose this to the board because the lawyers told me to disclose it, so I'm going to actually put on my glasses for this one. So we'll be using $270,000 from the grounds reserve, and that will be specifically given to the South grounds project. So when you take that 270, you can see that the bathroom's 200,000 and the grounds is the 270. We're going to be using 1.5 million from the continuous building improvement fund. And that comes together at $1.7 million. The grounds fund after use will still have $754,000 in it, and the continuing use will still have $3.3 million. And then all of you that were here at the exciting February meeting remembers that we have stuff left over from the bond that's now going to flow back into reserve. That's another $2.5 million. So just the facilities reserves will have $6.4 million left in them. Once again, this board has always been pro-reserve. There are some boards that don't like to be reserved. You've seen the wisdom in having them all these years, and you like to keep them healthy, and that's the plan for use there.
Well, what are we doing with the old doors from Marion Street and West End?
I always say to the directors, I'm not going to put you on the spot until I have to put you on the spot. Seda?
I don't have a plan for the doors just yet. We plan on just taking them down at this point. I didn't plan on using them anywhere else.
I mean, is it something of historic value? Is it something that could be used decorative in any way, or?
There's probably a way I could auction them off.
Which board policy requires us to do, so we would have to actually go through that process, even if it get,
Or even
they're old.
Yeah, but they're not 100-year-old
Right, right,
doors
right.
that have that historical value.
Well, I'm just
but-
saying, I wasn't sure, like, if it
Yeah.
was something that was of some value or could be used or even donated somewhere rather than just
And really,
thrown
when you look at them, I'm romanticizing them. They have these big, beautiful planes, but some of them are in really bad shape.
Okay.
As I can see the two principals out there saying, yes, they're in really bad shape. I won't say which one of those two principals said to me, I think the word was, if you give me the doors, I won't ask for anything else. I remember things. I remember things. You didn't think that was coming out in a recorded session, did you? No, it's a project that needs to be done. So, a couple of reminders. Proposition 4. So I talked about that great grounds reserve that we've been using slowly but surely. It is now 5 years old. The voters must renew it. So we established it in 2018 for 5 years. It ends this June. The full capitalization threshold was $2.5 million. We're there because we can add $500,000 a year. Its purpose is the replacement, renovation, and upgrade of district grounds. We would like to now ask the voters to extend it to June 30th, 2028. We would like to fully capitalize it at $5 million at the same funding level of $500,000 a year. That would appear as Proposition 4. If the board has no further objection and you like the budget that you see tonight, you can adopt that on March 8th. It then officially becomes the board's budget and not the administration's budget. So the official presentation of this budget, which will be in a very different way, I'll present it in the state way, not the Lynbrook way. That will be on May 3rd at a budget hearing. Your last day to register to vote is May 10th, and the budget vote is on May 16th. Questions from the board?
Yeah, I had just two questions. One, going back to that fourth proposition with the reauthorization of the grounds reserve, is there any cost to taxpayers in that, or can you explain where that $500,000 a year could come from?
Thank you for asking that. If we have, perfect example, I'm budgeting 10% for health this year. It's not been enough the last 2 years. But let's suppose health comes in at 7% instead of 10%. We now have fund balance. The fund balance at the end of the year, which the voters have already authorized, is then permitted to go into one of the reserves. That's where it would come from. So it's a savings account.
So there's no cost
There's no
to
cost.
taxpayers to voting yes on
Nope.
this. It just
Nope, not at all.
creates a savings account that we don't have.
Correct. And we've it's been a great reserve. We're doing 2 turf fields with it. We're doing Marion Street again, and we're doing North with it. We're about to do the South grounds. We're about to do the Marion Street playground. All of that is by using that reserve.
And then my other question, I guess it's more like macro. We're asking the community for 2.6% more in tax levy, but we keep reading and hearing about inflation 6, 7, 8%. How are we able to add all that program, knowing the fact that we're in a high interest, a high inflation environment, but still come in at such a low number? Like, what's kind of the magic going on to make that happen?
So now that is the flip side of Mr. Belmont's question. We're doing that on foundation aid. That is actually when you see a 24% increase, I've been downplaying it. It's a lot of money. $19 million is a lot of money. That's how we're able to do that. And the other important one, this is also important for sustainability. Remember, this board has traditionally been pro-reserve. That's what they're there for, so that when we need a little something to bring the two together, we're able to tap those reserves for that purpose when tough times come. We can't do that forever because you can deplete reserves, but you kind of, and that's really what the budget process is all about, and that will be the new challenge. As we say, that'll be someone else's problem, but not really. It's always the superintendent's problem, right, Dr. Burek? It's always the superintendent's problem.
Seeing nothing else from the board at this time, we'll open up to public comment. This is a budget hearing, so anyone wants to get up, please don't rush. Slow down, and you can come and ask questions to the board about the budget.
It's only our administration out there, so
I
they
know.
they know the answers to all their
Correct.
questions.
And I think I would be remiss to not say, what a great job. So you're all here tonight. We thank you for being here. But, the incredible work, the partners that they have been. The budget process can be, there's a lot of back and forth. Your secretaries are awesome also. You all know that because through the revision process. So thank you all for just doing another great job. And we have so many new principals. They really want to learn, and I've sat down with all of them for like an hour or 2 hours, and the planning that's gone in, and new directors. So they're eager students, or at least they pretend to be.
And so as a board, we can echo that also, how appreciative we are of the administration, the hard work that goes in, and we know it goes down all the way to each building on the individual level in those departments. And every year, we always pass our budget with a high number, and our budget sessions are usually lightly attended, which to me is just a reflection of what a great job we're doing. Of all the things people come to complain about, the numbers have always been handled very well in this district. Trying to get as much as we can out of those budget numbers, do as much as we can for our kids in the community. We always do an excellent job with that. I know Dr. Burek has done that for a long time. We're looking forward to that continuing as we move forward. I thank everyone for coming out. Our next meeting is a regular board meeting, which will take place on March 8th. Everyone get home safe.
Thank you.